SDPI, and I'll be moderating the session today. And very pleased to have with us two very good subject experts from across the region, from South Asia, South region, as well as neighbor countries. And I believe the focus we have for today is to mainly look at the global South and the changing climate diplomacy and governance, given the recent developments, especially the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and a couple of more developments that have happened therefore. But anyhow, we'll go into the discussions as we move forward. So firstly, let me start by introducing the speakers we have for today. We're very pleased to have with us Dr. Shafqat Munir, Deputy Executive Director at SDPI. We will later be joined by Dr. Abid towards the end. He's the Executive Director of SDPI, but moving forward, we have Mr. Faisal Sharif with us. He's the Director Environment and Climate Change at Private Power and Infrastructure Board, PPIB, under the Ministry of Energy Power Division, Government of Pakistan. We have Dr. Alexandra. She's the Director of Climate Action Center for Excellence. Thank you so much, Dr. Alexandra and Faisal Saab, for joining us. Moving forward, we have with us Ms. Mayu. She is an analyst at the Institute of Global Decarbonization Progress, IGDP, in China. And we really look forward to listening the perspective of the China from your end, because again, after US withdrawal, China has actually stepped up in this space as well. Next, we have Ms. Anjali. She's the Director of Policy at Asia Investor Group on Climate Change. Thank you so much, Anjali, for joining us and show you with, as we go to this discussion, she actually has a lot of great insights going into the finance side. Later, we have been joined by Dr. Zainab Naeem. Zainab heads the Ecological Sustainability and Circular Economy unit at SDPI, and definitely looking into the climate adaptation side of the NDCs as well. Last but not the least, we have with us Mr. Shakib Ilahi, is the Senior Advisor at SDPI. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. But let me start by setting some of the housekeeping rules. So today's session is being live streamed on SDPI's social media platforms, including Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We have people joining us both through Zoom, that is over here, as well as through these social media platforms as well. The session is being recorded and the video will be available online. You're always welcome to revisit the discussion later, and please feel free to share it within your networks as well. We also invite questions from our audience and colleagues at the end or as the session goes on. Please feel free to write them in the chat box or on the Q&A box on the right-hand side. And please have the chat box open in the window as well as, or you can also indicate that you want to speak for general audience by clicking the raise hand tab on the right side of the chat window as well. And definitely, we do have a specific time allocated for the Q&A session as well. So now, just before going to Dr. Shafqat for official thing of the session, so let me just sort of, based upon the concept notes, set a very brief theme that while all of the speakers we have are very versed on the topic of the NDCs, let me really set a brief scene. Now, we're all, do understand the importance of the NDCs under the Paris Agreement and what role they play in achieving the long-term climate goals. Now, as you know, in 2025, the parties to UNFCCC have to update their, submit their updated NDCs. That is for most of them, the third iteration. So to enhance the ambition over time, the Paris Agreement provides that successive NDCs must represent a progression compared to the previous NDCs and reflect their, highest possible ambition now. I don't have the exact number, but roughly over 20 countries have already submitted their NDCs for this year, NDC 3.0. So having said that, what theme we have for today calls for, two important topics. The first one is that we will definitely be discussing some cases on how countries are developing their updated plans, keeping a focus on South Asia. And secondly, perhaps, and more importantly, that how the recent developments such as the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement have impacted the climate ambitions of the countries. And for the global South, what should be the approach of, given that we're already and might continue to see a setback on the flow of finance and especially financial instruments such as about any of the country frameworks, or etc. But we'll definitely build upon as we go on. So let me initially request Dr. Shafqat Munir. Dr. Shafqat is the Deputy Executive Director at SDPI for his opening remarks, and then we'll move towards the panel that we have for today. With this, Dr. Shafkat, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ved. First of all, I would like to welcome all the distinguished panelists who are joining us from across Asia and representing the global south. So the debate you rightly mentioned here is the climate governance. Now, if you look at the global trends and politics and political economy of climate change governance, then we look at that certainly the rich countries, those who are responsible actually to provide resources to the global south to meet the impacts of climate change, are getting strength rather than we from the global south get the strength, which ultimately is resulting in terms of less money available as required. And we have seen last time that against 1.3 trillion demand, only 300 something billion have been committed. That will come until 2035, which means that in the previous COPs, we have been expecting that there will be some new global commitments coming up in terms of meeting the requirements as we have, which were the missed opportunities in terms of the Paris Agreement and after that commitment on $100 billion. So instead of that, now what happened with the global south is that in the last COP, we have shown another 10 years that you will get things in 10 years, and that too only one tenth of the demand what we have, what is required for meeting the climate change impact. That's the scenario which tells us that the global south, which means when we look at in the broader picture, global and north divide, or the politics across north and south, we see that there are one group of countries, those who are coming in the category of haves. South is among those countries, those can say they are from the have-nots. So this debate was on for years and years. But if you look at the last four COPs, where the commitments and where shifting paradigms we have says, and the argument behind that from the north is that we are also short of money. We are also facing the problem. That's why now the debate is that have-nots are also making excuses. Maybe it's lame excuses, or maybe they claim that they are right. So in this debate, and particularly the withdrawal of US from the Paris Agreement, second time again, that's a challenging thing, because if you look at the whole funding scenario after the new term of Mr. President Trump, we have seen that almost 60% of the global funding is somehow in a problematic situation. Similarly, following the suit, the West and Europe, they are spending more on their defense. So naturally, they will be coming to the fund reduction. UK has already announced some percentage of cuts in various things. But one thing is that the US funding cut is across the board, which is on gender, which is on climate change. But at least what UK has said, that they said whatever funding cuts they will be introducing, they will not harm the climate debate, the spending on climate. Similarly, we are expecting that Europe will also follow the suit. In that way, I think now the debate will be on that if US is out, then who else would be chipping in up? Last time, to some extent, China rescued us. Now China has its own commitments on climate change. For example, net zero targets, they are not agreeing to 2050. They say it is 2060. The other NDCs where you have talked about, countries are also thinking to revise their targeting in terms of net zero. If you look at the case of Pakistan, we have had NDC 2, which has saw some flaws in it. 35% of reduction was depending upon almost over $100 billion, which we required in funding, which is, is not available. That's why all the targets could not be met under that. Then lack of transparency. hardly any explanation for target calculation. Similarly, sectoral overpromises, which have been unrealistic, unforeseen, affordable goals. Then weak engagement. That were the areas where we saw some of the missed opportunities. For example, renewable energy transition, a weak shift from fossil fuels. Still, the fossil fuel lobby in the north, or even they are part of the global south, but when they are rich or they are the fossil fuel countries, they are counted themselves in the global north. So that's why the whole debate is here, that we are not shifting from the fossil fuel, which means the renewable energy transition, we call just transition, energy transition. These targets are also remains unmet. Then if you go to the agriculture and water adaptation, little focus has been on climate resilient farming, in particular in the global south. So in that way, similarly, cryosphere and glacier focus, limited action on glacier melting, because everything needs resources and techniques, so which generally the global south lacks. So these
Yes.
are the
I,
areas which actually we have to look at. Now there
hmm,
is an opportunity that now we should have a realistic target, at least aligned goal with actual capacity and funding, strong role by the the global south, and alliance. If there is a debate, then global south together should come and come on the negotiation table. So these are some of the challenging situation when the funding is out. Global south has a responsibility to unite themselves. They should analyze their own resources, whether technical or financial. They should develop a cooperation mechanism within the countries. I think with these kind of things, we can move
yeah.
ahead. I would not take much time because I know other speakers are waiting. So once again, I'll thank all the panelists here for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sefkat, for putting the right scene of particularly, especially highlighting the financial gap that exists, the funding gap that exists, and that definitely might see some of the backlash given the recent developments. And thank you for highlighting the China point. We'll come to that shortly as well, because I believe although it saw some of the backlashes coming in from the US withdrawal of the Paris Agreement, but with the Mayu President Xi's announcement of the NDCs in China and how he actually wants them to be more ambitious, that also has, I mean, the region the potential to bring the discussion back on track as well. But so this will be moving towards a panel. So we're going to structure is, I'll be requesting panelists to keep the initial interventions to 7 to 10 minutes, because we'll sort of try to do it in multiple rounds. But so how we'll do is we'll initially sort of start from the two cases. One is I'll be initially coming to Pakistan and then to China, and then gradually shifting towards the overall regional interventions and how to should the region as a whole sort of respond to these climate commitments. So thank you so much. First of all, let me sort of start with the case of Pakistan. We're very pleased to have with us Mr. Faisal from the Private Power Infrastructure Board. So just to sort of give a context, Pakistan just definitely have submitted its NDC 2.0 in 2021. For the NDC 3.0, the Private Power Infrastructure Board is leading the mitigation pillar, and Faisal Saab is the one who's also looking after it. So Faisal Saab, just to initially sort of set the discussion, how is Pakistan sort of shaping its next round of commitments within the NDCs? And more importantly, I mean, looking at how the global developments such as shifting the trade climate linkage, regional decarbonization trend, the alignment, how are they sort of influencing the priorities or structures of our upcoming NDCs? And also, if at this stage you want to sort of respond to like how US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and the declining momentum some of the major economies are observing, is it sort of supposed to, is it expected to have any sort of impacts on Pakistan's NDC 3 targets across sectors like power, agriculture, resilience, or any other point that you want to highlight? So yeah, thank you so much with this over to you.
Thank you, Abed. Can you hear me, please? Yeah,
Yes,
and
perfect.
thank you so much, STPI, for organizing this timely policy dialogue and for inviting me to contribute to this important conversation. I think this conversation is vital as Pakistan prepares its NDC 3.0 amidst a rapidly evolving geopolitical and climate policy landscape. I'll be sharing my views from two complementary perspectives. First, from the standpoint of Private Power Initiative Board (PPIB), which is leading mitigation component of NDC 3 this time, where MD PPIB is acting as the chair of the mitigation working group. And secondly, drawing on insight from my ongoing doctoral research at University of Bath, which has a very strong focus on political economy of energy transition, with particular emphasis on socio-political, economic policy, and justice implication of transitioning toward sustainable energy systems. So while responding to this question, I'll aim to cover Pakistan's obligation under the Paris Agreement regarding the submission of NDC, an overview of target and progress under NDC 2, the institution framework established for NDC 3, the role of PPIB, as well as key considerations related to climate justice, inclusivity, emerging global trends, and evolving diplomatic alignments. So, as all of you know, that under Article 4 of Paris Agreements, the country are obligated to submit progressive, successive nation-determined contribution after every 5 years, representing progression and reflection each country's highest possible emission to reduce GHG emissions. In this context, in context of its nation's circumstances. And for developing country like Pakistan, the NDC also offers an opportunity to present climate finance and technology transfer and capacity building needs. So NDC normally comprises of two components. The one is the mitigation targets and other is optional adaptation components. So if we look at NDC 2, Pakistan previously submitted this NDC 2.0 in 2021, and despite negligible shares in the global GHG emission, which is less than 1%, the country shows strong commitments towards achieving net zero, and accordingly, NDC sets emission reduction targets with an overall 50% reduction in projected emission by 2030, including 15% from countries' resources and 35% from subject to provision of international finance under the provision of Paris agreements. In context of green transition, I would particularly highlight the importance of energy sector. The decarbonization of energy sector, which in Pakistan case contribute more than 45% in country's emissions, is most crucial to achieve emission reduction and net zero. To mitigate emissions from power sector, Pakistan has set an ambitious target of 60% share of renewable energy, including hydropower, by 2030 under its current policies and plans. So far, I think Pakistan has achieved some good progress in decarbonizing of energy sector. These achievements include the current share of utility scale clean energy has already surpassed 33%, including hydropower. This still does not include the nuclear power, which is also a clean energy. And secondly, in the recent year, we have noticed a accelerated boom in the net metering solar-based installations. And as of 30th April 2021, the data available with PPIB, the net metering-based solar PV installation in Pakistan has reached beyond 335,000, contributing to cumulative capacity of 5,200 megawatts. Even with the inclusion of this net metering and off-grid installation, which I did not mention, the share of clean energy installed capacity is roughly around 50% as of today. So this is really a good progress, but that need to be documented because most of the off-grid solar installations are not mapped yet. And secondly, the government has recently retired 5 thermal IPPs of 2,500 megawatts. So that is again a positive developments towards emission reduction from the power sector. And then pursuant to IGCEP 2025 to 2035, which is currently under finalization, the current carbon emissions from power generations are 340 gram CO2 per kilowatt hour, which is expected to reduce to 209 gram per gram of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So this is a kind of major shift from fossil intensive grid towards clean grid. And then there are NICA's like National Energy Efficiency Plan, which aim to reduce 9 million ton of highly equivalent of energy. And then we have electricity vehicle policy targeting 30% share of. So these all are really good initiative which is supporting government of Pakistan to achieving its emission targets. So now I'll just briefly touch the institution framework for NDC 3 in Pakistan. So just for the interest of audience, the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment Coordination, MOCC, is designated entity in Pakistan, which is tasked to fulfilling the responsibility of obligation under the reporting obligation under the Paris agreements of UNFCCC framework, including the development of NDC. So the Global Climate Impact Studies Center, which acts as a secretariat of the MOCC for NDC, has established 2 working groups. One is the adaptation working group, which is chaired by the Federal Flood Commission, And second is a mitigation working group to guide development of NDC 3. And this mitigation working group is chaired by MDPPIB. So so far, it consists of 5 subgroups on energy, transport, industrial processes, agriculture, forestry, and waste management. So trusting on PPIB in this task of high national importance, reflecting our central role in power sector transformation and private investment in facilitation. UNDP is acting as a consultant for NDC 3, supporting the operation of the mitigation working group. And I would particularly like to mention the formal extended support of STPI, particularly OBAD. They are particularly providing a support in data compilation, policy recommendation, and coordination with the stakeholders. And to ensure inclusive and participatory approach, we have PPIB has so far conducted multiple stakeholder consultation sessions, engaging representatives from federal and provincial governments, entities, industry, civil societies, academia, and development partners. Now, I'll turn to just climate justice and inclusivity. So in NDC 3 is particularly explicitly integrate a climate justice lens at national and transnational level both. National level, we have a lot of climate injustice across the marginalized community and poor remote areas, whereas at the international level, the Pakistan, having a very negligible share in carbon emissions, is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. So recognizing Pakistan negligible contribution to global climate change, but extreme vulnerability to climate impacts, this NDC will particularly focus on the climate justice point of view. Further, inclusivity is cross-cutting theme for this NDC, and all the people involved in preparing are trying to ensure gender inclusivity, provincial voices, vulnerable communities, and private actor they all are encouraged to be part of the process. Now, I just touched the global trends and diplomatic realignment, shifting trade climate linkage such as CBAM in European Union and green hydrogen diplomacy are pushing Pakistan to align its industrial and energy policy with the global carbon intensity benchmark. So this is really important for the country. And secondly, regional trends like India's hydrogen mission, China's decarbonization finance are shaping our competitiveness and bilateral collaboration perspective. So a diplomatic strategy for NDC 3 should include, like we need to strengthen our cooperation with South. It's South-South cooperation, leveraging multilateral forums like UNFCCC, G77, and then seeking just transition partnership with G20 and other donor countries. Particularly, China is very important in this aspect because we are moving towards CPEC 2, and China is again committing some investments in green transition. So that is really important country for Pakistan. And then NDC 3 will not only reflect ambitions, but I think that should be a realism, ownership, and equity. And at PPIB, we ready to contribute actionable private sector aligned mitigation strategies that serve national and global climate goals. So that's all from my side in response to question 1. I'll be ready to answer any other question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Faisal Saab, for highlighting these points and fully agreeing that initially, definitely the structure and institutionalization of NDCs in Pakistan, and definitely, I mean, just to again reiterate, and we mentioned that Pakistan, despite being a vulnerable country, has actually done a lot towards the climate security, towards the climate change. And I believe one thing is that, I mean, at the same time, we have faced an extreme brunt of these climate challenges leading to really high climate cost in Pakistan as well. And this is the cost because, again, just like Dr. Shafkat also initially mentioned, that we haven't actually seen the flow of finance in that quantum in which the impacts are there. Most of this money is actually coming from the pockets of the people. If you look at the impacts of the floods, so it's the communities, it's the people that are sort of eventually paying that cost as well. And definitely, despite that, I mean, if you look at Pakistan's renewable energy transition, it is actually being studied as one of the really leading sort of stories across the world as well. The solar rush, and even the developments that have happened at the net metered as well as the utility scale developments as well. So yeah, thank you so much, Faisal Saab, for highlighting this, but fully understanding that Pakistan is again still committed in coming up with very ambitious and these NDCs as well, and something that is focused on the just transition side. So now coming to you, Ms. Mayu from the IGDP. So thank you so much, Mayu, for joining us. So again, just like we initially mentioned that the announcement of President Xi Jinping is actually something that brought this debate around the NDCs back. So if we look over the past year, China has actually made significant strides in the low carbon development. So how is actually China approaching the formulation of its NDC 3.0? Specifically, is there any intention to set more ambitious targets considering the global geopolitical climate and need for enhanced climate action as well? And also, if you, I mean, I mean, what did we see again talking about the backlash from the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement? And it was again for the first time that China's announcement encompassed all the sectors and the greenhouse gases, making a significant expansion from its previous commitment as well. So, how do you see these developments? And more importantly, if you can sort of shed a light on what lines the China is thinking around the NDCs as well.
Okay, thank you for the question. And before answering the question, I'd like to thank you, SDPI, for organizing such an amazing dialogue. And I'm so honored to be here to participate in this discussion. So for these two questions, for the first one, I think in the NDC submitted in 2021, China committed to achieving carbon peak before 2030 and carbon neutrality before 2060. And China also set several specific targets that need to be completed by 2030. According to the first biannual transparency report and other official data, China has made significant progress in many areas and has already achieved some 2030 targets ahead of schedule. For example, China's installed capacity of wind and solar power has exceeded 1.2 billion kilowatts, and the share of new energy vehicles has reached about 40%, and also the forest stock volume has increased by 6 billion cubic meters compared to the year of 2005. All of these are quite ahead of schedule. And as for the new NDC this year, we believe that China will further raise its ambition. As you mentioned, Chinese government has announced on multiple occasions saying that the new NDC will cover all economic sectors and all greenhouse gases. And based on HDP's observation, we believe that some action China has already taken could help pave the way to for its enhanced climate actions. For example, China has introduced policies to control certain non-CO2 greenhouse gases. For example, China has introduced policies to control the methane in 2023, and it also launched the national plan for implementation of the Montreal Protocol early this year. And my another thinking about this NDC update is that in addition to covering all of the greenhouse gases, as China has already announced, we also hope that China could commit to more actions to reduce the non-CO2 greenhouse gases and could promote more international cooperations, especially by leveraging its strengths in the clean energy to enhance the collaboration with other developing countries under the Belt and Road Initiative and also under the South-South Cooperation framework. Yeah, and for the second question, I think, of course, the United States is one of the major greenhouse gas emitters, and there's no doubt that Trump's administration's attitude towards the climate change can negatively influence the global climate governance, particularly when this comes to the technology access and the financing for the developing countries. However, I think since the climate change has already become a widely accepted consensus, and so we can believe that the majority of countries will still continue to push for a low carbon transition. That's for sure. And we still need to keep stressing the common but differentiated responsibilities and to urge those developed countries to fulfill the financial commitments. Yes, so with all this background, so we hope that China's decision to cover all greenhouse gases can help to strengthen the global confidence in promoting the climate actions. Because from my perspective, I think China's new NDC, if it covers the our economy and or the greenhouse gases, it will be a major step forward. Because according to China's latest emission data, the emission of non-CO2 greenhouse gases is about 2.7 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, accounting for roughly 19% of China's total emission. It's quite large. And moreover, different studies show that without additional efforts to control these gases, China's non-CO2 emission could reach about 3.1 to 3.7 billion tons of CO2 equivalent by 2050. Therefore, I think new NDC that covers all gases will be important for both China and also the global emission reductions. And at the same time, we also hope that China's new NDC will help promote cooperations between China and other countries because recently the non-CO2 gases are gaining more and more attention from countries and also international organizations. Through exchanges and cooperations, maybe China could learn from the advanced emission reduction practice, such as the practice of managing the abandoned coal mine and also the practice of building the life cycle management of F-gas. And we believe that China can also share some knowledge and technology for countries that in need through the South-South cooperation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mayu, for highlighting the China's role. And I fully agree with this. Before coming to Dr. Alexandra, that the point you especially mentioned about the technology transfer and how China needs to, I mean, and in my personal opinion, China really needs to be at center of those and help even the global South develop those areas as well. And secondly, I believe China in the last Belt and Road Forum also sort of announced some very wonderful initiatives, particularly talking about the green innovation and financing partnerships, how those instruments can actually be leveraged to further take this decision forward. So yeah, I think it's good to hear China's are also evolving and it's sort of thinking of expanding its horizon to cover those emissions as well. So I think this was an initial idea to sort of set the scene of the two countries, looking at one of the way Pakistan, the country that has already is vulnerable to climate, but still sort of trying its full to address the climate vulnerabilities, and at the same time looking at the role of China, which particularly for the global South is going to be very important. So with this, let me come to Dr. Alexandra. Dr. Alexandra, we actually wanted to set the scene for you before we come to your expertise and taking the debate more towards perhaps a bit of more of developing of the South Asian context as a whole. So I think taking lead from what I think Faisal Saab has also mentioned, Mayun has also mentioned that if we look at the global South and even perhaps South Asia or Southeast Asia in particular, they're already at the front line of these climate vulnerabilities, heat waves, floods, economic instability, eventually coming from those. So with the geopolitical uncertainties that we have touched upon a bit briefly, these shifting climate priorities among the major economies, how do you see these changes affecting that ability of developing countries to stay on track? And what safeguards or approaches should they adopt to avoid getting sidelined in this evolving climate architecture? So with this, this is sort of the first question from you. So yeah, over to you, Dr. Alexandra, and thank you so much for joining us again.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Thank you for the question. But first, let me also thank you for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm Alexandra Sötzer, Director of the Climate Action Center of Excellence based in Doha, Qatar. And at CASE, we are committed to advancing carbon markets under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So indeed, countries in the global South, particularly in South Asia, are already grappling with the significant impacts of climate change and deepening economic vulnerabilities. But these pressures increase also with rising geopolitical uncertainty. So the risk of major players like the US withdrawing from global climate agreements, shifting priorities among large economies, and such developments threaten to widen the climate implementation gap by reducing predictability in financial, but also in technical and in political support, which then in turn undermines private investment and trust in the global climate regime. So To avoid being sidelined, developing countries could adopt a dual strategy. On the one hand, strengthening regional cooperation and South-South knowledge sharing, while also diversifying climate finance and deepening cooperation through blended finance and results-based financing, including through emerging carbon markets under the Paris Agreement. And especially cooperation under Article 6 can reduce vulnerability to donor fatigue and shifting geopolitical alignments. But clear Article 6 regulations, MRV systems, and climate finance readiness are critical enablers. And as we know, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement provides an important foundation for international climate cooperation, and it enables both market-based and non-market-based approaches to help countries achieve their climate goals. But unlike the Kyoto mechanisms, Article 6 is grounded in the universal structure of the NDCs. The decision to participate in Article 6 mechanisms is therefore usually shaped by a country's national climate strategy, political context, and development priorities. And while participation is voluntary, timely and transparent communication of intent to participate in Article 6 markets is critical, because it helps to build trust among all market participants, and it also helps to align expectations, and it lays a strong foundation for cooperative engagement under the mechanism. And the primary vehicle for expressing this intent is the NDC. So the current NDC 3.0 update cycle is really very critical. And following the outcomes of COP29 in Baku, which provided political and technical clarity on operationalization of Article 6.4 and also additional guidance for Article 6.2, countries have now a really solid foundation to define their Article 6 positioning. And this includes identifying priority sectors, setting cooperation conditions, and aligning national policies with the broader international framework. And the alignment between Article 6 implementation and NDC is essential to ensure credibility, but also environmental integrity and effective reporting to UNFCCC. So without such alignment, countries risk failing to fully capture the benefits of Article 6 cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alexandra, for particularly highlighting the need for for having the climate readiness, and especially talking about the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and how market-based instruments like carbon markets can actually be play a very instrumental role. We will come back to you, Dr. Alexandra, on the same point on the blended finance models and how should South Asian countries perhaps more proactively embrace these tools very shortly as well. But thank you so much for setting the scene. And I believe this also is very good case for Anjali to sort of come in here as well. So thank you so much, Anjali. Just to sort of give a recap, she is the Director of Policy at Asia Investor Group on climate change, with a lot of expertise in the finance sector as well. So Anjali, I believe you look into the overall Asia's investment landscape. So with the increasing geopolitical shifts that I think many of the speakers have talked about on how it is actually impacting the climate finance flows, investor confidence. And so how do you see this landscape of climate investments evolve in South Asia? And if there are some of the challenges and perhaps more opportunities do investors currently face in aligning capital with the region's NDC 3.0 ambitions, especially considering the economic and political uncertainties in play? And just, I believe the second part of question just before coming to you is, given the ambitious nature of NDCs and the financing gaps for the South Asia, which innovative financing mechanisms could perhaps, do you believe, hold a very promise for mobilizing private sector investments this region as well. So with this, over to you, Anjali. Thank you.
Great. Those are, I think, very complex questions to answer in about 7 minutes, but I will try my best. So as I was introduced, my name is Anjali. I'm Director of Policy with the Asia Investor Group on Climate Change, AIGCC. So we are an investor network. We bring together institutional investors, so the likes of asset owners, so pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and other asset managers as well. We work with both domestic investors, but also global ones that have significant exposure to Asian markets. So we work with sort of the big ticket investors, 80 plus institutional investors that manage around 40 trillion USD in AUM. And the work that we are sort of really trying to do with investors is to help them understand how climate risks and opportunities will really manifest in Asian markets. So they are able to actually integrate and respond adequately through capital allocation, which I think in the long run, when you sort of look at NDCs and climate finance flows, I think there is a big role for private finance to play, and we're sort of trying to clear the path to sort of helping private finance understand how and where they should sort of really come in to support markets to achieve those ultimate objectives of achieving net zero economies that are nature positive, that have resilience as a factor, and also looking at the social impacts of climate and ensuring that those are also factored into creating these economies and ensuring capital can play a role in helping economies achieve those outcomes. So I think just to maybe answer your question, perhaps on the first element on like how are these sort of political impacts and the recent sort of economic uncertainties impacting the way that investors are responding to climate risks. I would say we do this annual process of doing like this large scale assessment of how investors in Asia are sort of responding and integrating climate risks and opportunities. So this year we did a survey of 230 institutional investors that manage around 100 trillion USD in AUM to really try and understand the progress that they've made since last year and sort of where are the gaps as well, so we can sort of really work on addressing those gaps as AIGCC. So I think one of the biggest takeaways that we see is that the acknowledgement from institutional investors who are long-term investors into markets about the climate risks and opportunities in Asian markets is growing year on year. So 75% of these investors have sort of acknowledged the importance of climate risks and opportunities in setting their strategies, which means that they understand that climate risk is a financial risk. And even despite whatever happens from like a political landscape and countries sort of backsliding, they do see that the cost of economic inaction due to climate risk is actually much bigger than the cost of economic action. So you need to sort of find a way to actually help economies transition to meet these climate risks. And I think the way to sort of do that is by highlighting opportunities where private capital can come in a way that sort of they are able to manage the risks and help the markets along as well. So there's, I think, quite a bit of recognition. And when you sort of look at 75% of 230 investors, that's sort of like the biggest, a big pool of capital that sort of recognizes that, things need to change and capital needs to flow to sort of support these markets. And we also see that, it's just not like sort of understanding of this, understanding of risk. It also is translating to policies that investors have internally. So 66% of investors surveyed have developed like a climate policy on how they would allocate investments to support these climate risks and opportunities as well. And I think where we're sort of seeing the biggest progress is that investors are increasingly allocating more capital towards climate solutions. In fact, they're creating like a specific bracket to sort of seize opportunities in markets across climate solutions, looking at energy storage solutions, looking at renewable energy integration. And as these are being integrated in markets, you also see the gaps as well. So you see that, grids and transmission infrastructure needs to sort of, be updated to keep that momentum going on renewable energy integration. So investors are also looking at ways that private capital can come in to support grid and transmission infrastructure expansion and sort of other mechanisms as well. So I think there is sort of significant momentum from the finance sector to try and sort of work with markets on identifying where private capital can come in. But we do see that there are significant gaps in terms of the types of markets that's able to access this capital, which is also, I think, where AIGCC is stepping in. So we see with emerging markets, developing economies, their ability to actually bring in this big ticket capital is diminished by a number of factors. I think the one that sort of stood out most in engaging with investors is their inability to really identify what needs to happen in developing markets, emerging economies. And maybe one of the biggest gaps that they do see is the lack of data that gives more credibility on sort of like, what needs to happen in emerging markets on themes of mitigation, adaptation, nature, the social issues as well. So I think that's one fundamental gap. We also do see that there are sort of like policy uncertainties and lack of understanding of what the ultimate target is and how that sort of target is set out to be achieved through short-term, medium-term, long-term planning. I think this is really where that link to NDCs sort of make most sense. So I think it's important to ensure that NDCs have a concrete target and it sort of is working towards being an investable policy document that sort of sets clear indication to the market of like where it needs to head in a short-term, long-term, and medium-term sort of processes as well. This would sort of give investors a better clarity on how they can actually engage with corporates, try to find the types of solutions that markets require, and also have more clarity on where perhaps policy can come in with more incentives for investments in certain areas as well based on sort of priority. So I think these sort of avenues is quite important. And I think a couple of speakers have also mentioned this. I think while we do see that there is some level of progress, it is clearly not adequate to meet the scale and pace of transition that we really need to see in markets, especially in South Asia. I think things are progressing quite slowly, and we really do need to ramp up the pace at which these policies are being set and how our policy is being used by businesses to attract capital into the market. So I do think that there needs to be sort of more engagement between these different stakeholders to see how can you actually create a policy incentive to enable this ecosystem to sort of translate. I think just coming to your question on sort of what types of financing instruments I think you think would be required in these markets, I do feel like, sometimes we sort of get lost by just sort of talking about opportunities. I do feel like we need to also focus on ensuring that markets are resilient and equipped to actually attract future capital as well. So we do need to look at the difficult elements of transition and how do we actually bring the private sector in more in a meaningful way. So I mean, I think when we talk about, for instance, adaptation and resilience, it typically is a conversation where it's I think the perception is that it's typically like a public finance avenue, or it is sort of funded by the population. But I think that sort of really needs to change when you look at the scale of capital that's required for adaptation and resilience. So I do think, again, coming back to frameworks that would be required to ensure capital flows even into like difficult areas, you need to sort of look at giving market more clarity on sort of what are the risks that you're trying to address, mapping those risks in terms of data to solutions as well. Some of the solutions might be available already in the market, but otherwise it's sort of creating an understanding of what types of solution needs to come in to plug in these risks. It is also about trying to create the types of projects that is required to sort of build adaptation, resilience, which would help the private sector actually map out which types of capital can come in to, I think, address which types of risks. I think maybe one of the fundamental perception gaps that we see when we engage in these forums with regard to climate finance is, I think you sort of see private finance in one bucket, which is not entirely true. So private finance, depending on which source it's coming from, has different risk appetites, which can sort of be suited to meet different projects. So I think giving the private sector a bit more clarity of what does the market need in terms of projects, and allowing the private sector to actually innovate and create blended finance structures where required, and where required you can actually come in through pure private finance as well. But I think the fundamental framework of understanding what is the risk, what is the opportunity, creating that project pipeline, engaging with the different sectors to sort of really understand how can you bring in private capital with the least amount of actually blending would be, I think, what is sort of most required in Asian markets. I would say, like, because of the range of investors that we work with, I think there is huge amount of investor interest to actually come into markets and work closer with policymakers and businesses to identify where private capital can sort of play that role in bridging the climate finance gap. Is actually the role that AIGCC is as well trying to play. But maybe if there's sort of more time over the course of this discussion, I can come to more concrete
definitely.
examples as well.
Sure. Thank you so much, actually, for so structurally responding to the questions. And it's good to hear the investors have the interest is growing, that the climate discussion is coming into the overall broader narratives. And thank you for a very comprehensive response on the private instruments, how we should actually tap in the private sector more. We will definitely come back to you with a couple of questions, but coming to Zainab, I believe one question Dr. Zainab named. Zainab is currently working as the research fellow as well as the head of ecological sustainability and circular economy unit at STPI. So Zainab, now one angle which we do believe that is currently missing from this debate is basically more around what you say, effective ways that need to be integrated to ensure not just a top-down, but perhaps even a bit of a bottom-up approach as well. How do you make NDCs more inclusive? How do you generally, address the concerns of the marginalized communities, women and youth, especially in regions like South Asia, where vulnerabilities are up so high? So if you can sort of respond to this, and how can you think integration of local knowledge, grassroots adaptation efforts, and community-driven solutions be reflected in the national climate frameworks, such as the NDCs one as well? So with this, over to you, Zainab. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abed. But before I respond, I would like to thank Anjali because she has pointed a very important aspect that we need to guide the private sector on where exactly and how exactly they need to engage in context of climate change. And I think this is something that has been missing throughout the climate debate, throughout the NDCs. You know, when guideline is not there, or one cannot expect the right kind of investments and engagements that are very much needed. Now, coming towards your question, I think throughout the entire process of NDCs, one thing that seems very much missing is we are unable to identify the key approach that for NDCs, you're not only going to be taking a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach, it has to be along all the verticals, right? But it has to be always community driven. So you start with community driven adaptation and resilience building. But before that, before even talking about NDCs, you have to come up with climate vulnerability risk assessments. If you do not have a climate vulnerability risk assessment for your country, whatever is getting into that NDCs document is not going to be fruitful for your country. It might be good document, for the sake of submission to UNFCCC, but it's not going to bear any fruits for your country. So I think climate vulnerability risk assessment, second important factor that remains missing, and it is also something that we found out while we were doing a study for Asian Development Bank, that was on the linkage, identifying the linkage of social protection and climate adaptation. So what we found out that throughout the projects that are ongoing in Pakistan, if I talk about my country's perspective, climate adaptation projects have this missing link, that they're not able to link it with social protection. There's hardly any relevance being made to social protection efforts. But if we talk about the social protection programs, climate adaptation is one way or the other linked to those programs, but even that link is not strengthened. So I think when we talk about community engagement and then getting it into the NDCs, adaptation and resilience building they are the integrated key, and for that you have to ensure that each and every step along climate agenda, adaptation and social protection is linked together. Third important aspect, you talked about indigenous knowledge. Local indigenous knowledge, it only gets integrated when you develop community-led adaptation program, then you go for district adaptation program, then you go for city and provincial, and then you go for national adaptation plan if you want it to be a community driven approach. Those adaptation plans make sure that when you are submitting your NDCs, communities and marginalized groups do not get missed out. So I think this approach is very much missing at this point. Secondly, coming towards again that in South Asia perspective, of course we know that this is the least integrated a region in the world. But again, so when you are formulating a document like NDCs, you have to make sure that sectoral level scientific approach is not missing. By sectoral level scientific approach, I mean you have to assess the geopolitics of the region, the socio-economic perspective, and how livelihoods are going to be impacted in the long run. If this assessment is not there, how are we even making sure that we are making commitments like 30% reduction by this year, 20% improvement by that year? So I think it's not going to work. Then coming towards again, how to ensure that marginalized groups become part of the NDCs process. Again, for that, you have to see how the finance gets trickled down to your communities. When you think from that lens, from that perspective, if we have to ensure climate adaptation and resilience building, how it's going to be trickled down towards communities. And when you think from that perspective only, then you're able to integrate within your NDC document, the kind of practical approaches, the kind of transformational approach, not ambitious, that is very much missing at this point. Last but not the least, I think from coming towards youth perspectives, why? Because South Asia has a youth bulge. And when they're not being made part of the policy decision table, I think it's not going to work. You will face brain drain. Giving you example of from floods 2022, there is hardly any study that indicates it, but because we conducted some field studies there, so we found out that people, when they lost their assets in floods, they sent their children to Middle East and to other European countries illegally. And then human trafficking aspect was there. So it was a climate change driven migration. The challenge is we link it directly with socioeconomic perspectives, not directly with climate change. So those studies are missing. These are still gaps that we need to assess and study how this is happening, how brain drain is happening illegally, how we need to curtail that. So I think youth engagement at policy level at this time in South Asia region is very limited, and it's needed at this point. And also when you talk about youth engagement, we are very much focusing on green skills, but we are not sure what is the status of green jobs in our country, right? So when we talk about NDCs, you need to have that gap assessment, and based on that gap assessment, you make sure your planning integrates all these marginalized groups, and your NDCs are sector integrated NDCs, gender, vulnerable communities, and that also contain the localized knowledge that is not there. At least I haven't seen in any of the policy documents that I go through in South Asia. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sena, for highlighting the case and how should again the inclusivity should be brought in and addressing the challenges where the gaps exist and how they can actually be just before going to the next round, we do have some questions. I'll just very quickly summarize and then request the individuals to also sort of respond to them. Firstly, I think before I'll initially come to Faisal Saab, but before that, just to sort of summarize the questions, Ms. Mayu, there's again, I believe 2 questions are there for you that are mainly talking about the South-South cooperation. So firstly, it is like based upon how you highlighted the progress in integrating LCA, expanding sectoral coverage. So for countries such as Global South with limited technical and financial resources, what are the potential steps that can be taken, especially through South-South cooperation, that can actually support the transparency? And I believe this question is again repeated later when we are sort of talking about the role of regional cooperation or South-South partnerships play in building shared technical capacity, especially around data transparency, emissions tracking, and climate reporting as well. Coming to the next one, I believe it is about and I think Anjali, it links more to you that it is that as countries in the Global South face rising debt stress while trying to meet enhanced climate commitments and NDCs, how can non-debt creating instruments such as climate grants, carbon markets, and result-based finance be mainstreamed into global climate finance architecture? And even I think Anjali as well as Dr. Alexandra can respond to them. So it's talking a bit about what enabling policies or international cooperation frameworks are needed to ensure. One of the questions that we have actually received on all of many of the platforms is again talking about how to sort of go about the current geopolitical uncertainties, and especially for the case of Pakistan. So let me initially come to Faisal Saab and then to Mayur. Faisal Saab, I think this was also initial point, and perhaps initially we sort of decided to ask this question from you as well. That although Pakistan is a climate vulnerable country, but again, how is the government sort of, or even Pakistan sort of preparing to navigate the current geopolitical and uncertainties, such as uh, the US withdrawal we have been talking about? What strategies are being considered to secure the international support needed to implement NDCs targets across these sectors? So if you want to sort of first, and then we'll move to the other speakers as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Abed. Particularly, before answering this question, I would like to mention that to achieve the targets under the Paris agreements and to move towards a low carbon economy, this transition is particularly challenges for the developing country, not only Pakistan, but for all the developing country, due to peculiar socio-economic, technical, and policy level issues. So this is not the case of Pakistan. Particularly, like Anjali and like Zainab mentioned, that it's not only about the climate finance, it's about the guiding principle. It's about the set rules and regulation which can direct the investor to with particular metrics of risk and opportunities that can direct the investor to invest in climate resilient and adaptation projects. So I would just give a brief context that Pakistan's global greenhouse gas emissions between 2018 and 2021 has increased from 489 million ton of oil equivalent to 521. So this is not a very big increase. And first time the agriculture sector has surpassed the energy sector with contribution of 46%, where the energy sector is 40%. So in 2022, the World Bank estimated the total investment requirement for comprehensive response to Pakistan climate and development challenges between 2023 to 2030, approximately US dollar 348 billion. So this is a big amount, including 152 billion for adaptation resilience and US dollar 196 billion for deep decarbonization. So Pakistan also emphasizes for enhanced access to global financing mechanism like green climate funds and the global environment facility to mobilize resources effectively. But we face major challenges in slow disbursement from multilateral funds, high project cost, in capacity issues, limited technical capacity in local governments, the provincial and federal governments. And then along with the withdrawal of signal of US wavering on Paris agreements and climate action stalling in some developed countries, the global climate finance pool is further under pressure. So that's put another pressure on the country. However, I think there are some opportunities. If we look on the positive side, the Pakistan has some good opportunity through deepening ties with the CPEC phase 2, particularly with Chinese investment. They have huge pool for the global south, particularly after facing tariff issues with the global north. And then there's a clear opportunity for south-south cooperation promotion. Then Pakistan is, I think, looking to engage Middle East partners like UAE, Saudis on clean energy finance. There is an opportunity to strengthen G77 plus China bloc negotiations for greater equity in climate financing. And then on the diplomatic front, I think Pakistan continued to advocate for climate justice at the global forums. I think Pakistan was the first country among the few countries to prepare loss and damage needs assessment, linking flood and climate extreme to mitigation inaction by the major emitters, the developed countries. Pakistan actively seeks climate finance, technology transfer, and capacity building to achieve its NDC targets. On innovative financing options, I think there are many innovative ways. First and foremost, I think to avail these options, the Pakistan need to improve its climate governance, aligning our policies, institutions, and process with the climate targets at local, national level, and urging for international cooperation. And secondly, to utilize the climate finance tools such as the carbon markets. And then in the next phase, I'll explain that how Pakistan is working on different plans and different strategies to enhance these financial tools to achieve the climate targets. And then I think another point which is very related to my research, that on the energy side, because we also need to move towards more decentralized energy models. Not like we are moving right now, because that is not something documented. We need to shift away from a conventional project finance model of renewable energy projects towards more kind of innovative financing models at distributed, decentralized model to empower local communities and to get like maximum benefits for in terms of economic and social benefits for the local peoples. Overall, Pakistan energy transition requires $101 billion by 2030. So I think the good thing is that Pakistan has some really good initiatives on the climate change, and that can help country in mobilizing climate finance and private sector investment. So the number one, the State Bank of Pakistan, in collaboration with MOCC, Ministry of Climate Change, Associated Working Group, and technical experts, has devised draft national green taxonomy, and this is a major step towards aligning Pakistan's financial sector with sustainable development goals and enhance clarity for investors. So what Anjali talks about, the clarity about investors and financial institutions regarding green economic activity. So this is, I think, really good step. This is the final stages of I think finalization. And then Ministry of Climate Change also announced a carbon market policy with the objective of establishing national carbon market framework. This policy aims to help decarbonize countries' economy while generating revenue through sale of carbon credits while significantly reducing GHG emissions. This can have open door for Pakistan to attract climate financing, particularly for renewable energy projects, if you develop the right mechanism. Again, this kind of implementation, it was really implemented in a better way, like developing right mechanism to participate. And then another plan which I would like to mention is the Climate Vulnerable Forum. It's an intergovernmental organization for the 70 plus climate vulnerable countries in collaboration with, and they with collaboration with MOCC are preparing climate prosperity plan for Pakistan. And these climate prosperity plan are national investment strategies to 2050, designed to maximize socioeconomic outcome through the accelerated transition and climate proof of economy. These plans delivers actionable investment and implementing pathway to move from climate vulnerability to climate prosperity. And in this context, PPIB is contributing by providing sector-specific insights from the power sector, particularly in mobilizing private investment for low-carbon energy infrastructure to support the integration of sustainable energy planning into national strategy. And then I think another area is the indigenization of the solar PV solar PV value chain. From 2020 to 24, Pakistan imported $4.1 billion worth of solar panels, with over 22 gigawatts of solar panel imported in the last 18 months, including 5.2 gigawatts in January 2025. So this sharp increase reflects the rapidly growing demand for solar energy in the country. In response, the government is, I think, actively pursuing the localization of the solar PV value chain to reduce import dependency, curb trade deficits, and promote local employment. And finally, on the capacity building side, because there are clear capacity constraints that persist across key federal, provincial, and local levels, with support from developing partners, we aim to, we are still using Tier 1 IPCC guidelines for preparing NDC, and that reflect a basic level of details. This is clear. There is a clear need for Tier 2 or Tier 3 method to capture sectoral complexity, particularly in energy subsector. Then even we lack capacity on data collection and analysis. Substantial gap in climate-related data management and analysis, particularly in key sectors such as agriculture, water management, and disaster risk. And then there's an absence of monitoring evaluation system to track progress on climate projects, making it difficult to measure. And then finally, there's a lack of expertise for preparation of competitive climate finance proposal, limiting the ability to access international funds. But then again, I'll talk about opportunity. Recently, while we are working on the NDC 3.0, I would like to mention that International Renewable Energy Agency has already extended its valuable support to PPIB in preparation of NDC 3.0. They have prepared insight NDC recommendations, note for Pakistan, and offer to review the draft NDC once it's prepared. This support is not only timely, but highly valuable for country, keeping in view ARENA's strong expertise in energy transition and Pakistan's strong commitment towards climate change and energy transition. Finally, I think Pakistan faced key challenge in this implementation, particularly in mobilizing climate finance, assessing advanced technology, and strengthening institutional capability. So the success of NDC 3 hinges not just on what Pakistan determined, but what other developing country foresee, but on what developed world delivers in response. Why I'm saying this? Because at national level, Pakistan experienced 170 major natural disaster events between 2000 and 2020, which caused the economic loss of $30 billion. So in summer 2022, Pakistan faced devastating floods, which caused 33 million people displacement and loss of $30 billion. At a global level, extreme weather events such as heavy rains, floods, wildfire, and hurricanes caused $3.64 trillion loss to world economy over the past 2 decades. And since 1850, I would particularly like to mention about the developed worlds, why they are responsible. The global temperature has already increased beyond 1.2 degrees C. as the world has emitted 2,500 gigaton of CO2, and that is 86% of total carbon budget set to prevent global warming beyond 1.5 degrees C. So if efforts are not made to reduce GHG emissions, global warming may cause economic loss of 18%. So here where the developed country come forward to support the developing world, particularly the operationalization of loss and damage funds, the fulfillment of promise of mobilizing 100 billion per year in climate funding by 2020, that is still falling short of $1 billion. And finally, to address these ecological and climate emergencies required collective actions. The government to implement policies and regulation to incentivize sustainable practices, companies, corporations to adopt sustainable and circular economies, and individual to make lifestyle change to reduce carbon footprint. So we need all these collective action to achieve the targets. Otherwise, obviously, it's not easy. That's a very challenging task.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Faisal Saab, for initially responding to the question and then highlighting the further case of Pakistan. So, Ms. Mayu, back to you. I believe you had the chance to go through the question. If you want to sort of respond to this or any of the points that have been highlighted during the discussion, so yes, over to you.
Okay, so thank you for this question. I'm not an expert in this area, but I just can share some of my thinking. So China is still working on to try to strengthen its MRV system and to try to strengthen the transparency of the data. So I think the cooperation could be very important. And I think through the South-South cooperation, maybe the global South countries could share the experience in policy design and in how to implement those policy, and especially in how to design how to improve the MRV system, and maybe with the progress moving on, those countries in the same region, maybe they can create a regional cooperation platform, something like that, so that they can share the best practice, and also maybe even to develop the tools or standards together so that they can reduce the cost and to be more efficient. And I think third thing is that, of course, the training and the capacity building for those local experts, and also the financing can be very important. And in this area, I think China has long been working on this area. Since 2016, China has worked with many developing countries to over those capacity building and training program, and also China provided more than 177 billion RMB to support the climate actions. So I think maybe the attentions in the future could be put more on the MRV system building, and to make the data more and to increase the transparency. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ms. Mayun. That was the response we're looking at. Coming back to Dr. Alexandra, I believe we have a couple of questions that are more highlighted towards how the developing countries do need more of like instruments that are non-debt creating, such as, I mean, you yourself mentioned a lot about the climate grants, sorry, not climate grants, but mainly carbon markets, Article 6. So how do you see? I think you have already responded to the question. Thank you so much in the chat. But if you would like to sort of shed a bit of light on it, so the others can also sort of see this as well. So yeah, over to you. So,
yeah, no, thanks. I responded to the specific questions related to how to integrate carbon finance in the NDC, and I can talk about the use of carbon finance and market-based instruments in more detail, because I think that South Asian countries, including Pakistan, should really proactively embrace market-based instruments, not as a complete substitute for traditional climate finance, but as a complementary tool to unlock new resources, and especially to incentivize private sector investment. Because these mechanisms can really mobilize investment for mitigation, but often generate also adaptation co-benefits. particularly in sectors such as waste management or agriculture, for example, the implication of alternate wetting and drying in the rice sector. However, the successful use of these instruments hinges on foundational, institutional, and policy enablers. And we have heard this already in different contributions today. But this is also applicable to carbon markets because without these enablers, carbon markets risk becoming inaccessible and ineffective for countries with constrained technical and financial resources. So participation in Article 6 mechanisms is governed by the modalities and procedures adopted at COP26. And these decisions define the minimum conditions that parties must meet to engage in cooperative approaches under the Paris Agreement. However, operationalizing these mechanisms means that countries must be fully aligned with, or the design of frameworks, institutional and regulatory frameworks should be aligned with the design and the scope of a host country's NDC, because without this alignment, there is a risk of overselling or generating mitigation outcomes that are not compatible with the country's broader climate targets and long-term low-emission development strategies in particular. And of course, the overarching goal of the Paris Agreement. So the robustness of an NDC is a critical precondition for a country to effectively and credibly participate in Article 6 cooperative approaches. And this robustness refers to how well the NDC is defined, quantified, and embedded in a country's policy and reporting framework, because this would allow environmental integrity and accuracy accounting and transparency in all transactions. Yeah, so this is very critical, and you can see this. Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, so you can see this in responses of technical expert review teams to initial reports submitted to UNFCCC, where the first section of the report and the questions related to the responses in the report are entirely related to the NDC. So based on these UNFCCC requirements for reporting, the assessment of a country's NDC embedment in an initial report focuses on several key categories or questions. And these questions are used to confirm that the NDC is sufficiently defined to support a country's participation in cooperative approaches. If this is not the case, UNFCCC's technical review team will raise inconsistencies in reporting, and these inconsistencies can, especially if it is related to the NDC, cannot be answered at project level. Yeah, so this has to be improved in the NDC, and if it is now in the beginning of a new NDC cycle, it will take years to improve the NDC. So this cycle, this NDC 3.0 should be used to make sure that the NDC is actually a strong basis for a country's participation in Article 6. And so the question is, what actually constitutes a robust NDC for Article 6 participation? And here has some very broad, some broad guidance. So it requires a clear and quantifiable target, because without quantified NDC, corresponding adjustments become impossible or meaningless. So robust NDC should have a greenhouse gas-based targets in ton CO2 equivalent, even if derived from activity-based or policy-based mitigation actions, a clearly defined baseline. This could be a baseline as usual scenario or historical year, and credible projection of expected emissions under the NDC. Then NDC should also provide clarity and transparency to enable third-party validation of NDC scope and progress. Robust NDC should explicitly state if Article 6 mechanisms will be used and which portion of the NDC is open for such cooperation. and what I also responded in the question is to say the NDC is conditional is not sufficient. Yeah, conditional NDC means it is part of a country's target. So if a country transfers ITMOS from a conditional NDC, it is still struggling to justify how this activity contributes to the overall NDC target. And also a clearly defined scope of emissions where ITMOS are generated, because only emissions within the inventory boundary are eligible for corresponding adjustments, or only those activities can actually apply corresponding adjustments. And then finally, NDCs require legal and institutional readiness that enables transparent accounting, tracking, and reporting. So in conclusion, proactively engaging in carbon markets is not only a strategic necessity, it is a chance, yeah, for Pakistan to shape this mechanism and to allow this mechanism to serve its development goals. And with the right institutional enablers in place, Pakistan can secure its climate and economic dividends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alexandra. That was very well responded. And I believe you also responded to the last question I was about to sort of come to, that is to sort of requesting each speaker to give one recommendation. So we already have a very well-structured roadmap how the carbon markets and Article 6 needs to play a strong role. So before I'll be requesting each speaker for one recommendation for this platform, but just before that, let me come to Zainab. There's a question that I do believe sort of links to you, that how can NDC 3.0 framework in South Asia be designed to meaningfully integrate youth leadership and innovation, ensuring that climate action is both intergenerationally and just and socially transformative. So if you want to respond to it, but just a request to sort of respond a bit briefly, as we would like to sort of move towards a conclusion. And after Zainab, I'll just be requesting each speaker to, that from their end, if they can just highlight in 30 seconds, one recommendation for policy recommendation for this platform. What we would like to sort of do is sort of try to translate this discussion into a 2 to 3 pager policy advisory that can actually then be circulated to various departments. So, but yeah, Zainab, first coming to you on the youth question, and then moving forward.
Yes, thank you so much, Abed. I think this is a debate that I have already been doing on my LinkedIn platform as well. So it's I'm glad that this question popped up here. So the reason that in order to understand climate change, it's important that we see how people, policies in the past and actions have shaped the climate change crisis in which we are in now, right? So it starts from the industrial revolution. That's a very well established fact. If you go through the IPCC report, starting from AR1, etc., you will see how it's being linked. Climate change naturally has been happening because greenhouse gas is a natural phenomena to keep the temperature of the earth stable. But why it got exacerbated, that was because of the industrial revolution. That was because we started depending on fossil fuels. Unchecked industrialization, unchecked fossil fuel consumption, unchecked extraction, overconsumption of resources. And then, because it became established globally, setting up economic indicators towards fossil fuel consumption and how GDP gets measured. So it was established for a generation like ours to, continue with that. But now I think there's one thing that we need to understand. Yes, I agree, over extraction and overconsumption is still happening. Fast fashion is there, but at least millennials and Gen Z are vocal about it. They are talking about it. They're voicing their opinions. They're thinking about solutions on how we can maintain the resources for next generation and how we can at least slow down climate change. If not slow down, how we can take action. So I think in that perspective, it's important that intergenerational solidarity gets established, youth voices, and because they have the ideas, they have the solutions, the older generation and those sitting at the policy tables need to integrate and need to, if they're challenging, youth are challenging the status quo, older generation need to understand that, they're the ones who are the agents of change and they're the ones who will be shaping the future. So I think for that, it's important we understand from their perspective, we learn from the past, and we take action for the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Zainab, for responding to that. And just coming to the last question, we will very quickly like to move towards Shakib Saab. But just before that, I'll initially start from Anjali. If you have any one pointer that you would like to sort of mention at the end on recommendation side. But yeah, just very briefly, perhaps 30 seconds, I'll be requesting each speaker. Yeah. So Anjali, please go ahead.
Sure. So I think, I think where we are at on sort of like climate policies, we're sort of really moving from just setting targets to really working on implementation. And I think where there is a gap in what we're seeing on climate policy and NDC is the lack of a holistic approach. So not just looking at emissions, but like the impact that you would have on nature, sort of looking at maintaining legacy forests and actually preventing climate outcomes as much as possible through integrated policy, I think is quite important. And I think some of the gaps that we're seeing in Asian markets is the lack of coordination from like the ministerial approach, like the lack of coordination between policymakers, businesses, investors in that ecosystem. I think we really need to sort of work towards creating that holistic approach. And I think a lot of that is through sort of breaking these silos that we have set up in the policy making process, in the engagement process, to actually understand what the true impact of climate is and actually create a holistic response, I think would be one of the fundamental, I think.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anjali ji. Faisal Saab, if I can come to you next, please.
Yeah, I think thank you. Well, I think it was really good, recommendation. My recommendation is also obviously we have very good targets, but it's time that we really want to work on improving our climate governance. So when I talk about the climate governance, it means the set of policies, procedures, institutional arrangement, the political will. So all at local level, at nation level, and then Pakistan being one of the most climate vulnerable country, the victim of the climate change, which it has not caused, but it is paying the cost of someone else, some other countries who basically are responsible for this climate change. So we need to put our case at the international forums for under the climate justice framework for getting these loss and damage kind of funds and climate financing. So for me, I think it's time to improving climate governance, aligning our policies, institutional arrangement, processes with the climate targets. And the good thing is that now I feel that at every level, at society, at individual society, and even at a government level, there's strong realization that climate change is occurring and occurring very fast. We are seeing like recently a lot of extreme weather events. So it's high time that we need to realign all these policies with our climate targets.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Faisal Saab. Ms. Mayu, if I can request you next, if you want to sort of add any point, last one point in 30 seconds.
Yeah, just to say, this is a very good dialogue, and I learned a lot from today's discussion, and I hope it's the same between countries to increase such dialogue and to increase communication. I think the global South countries should to keep such kind of dialogue and communication. That's what's the most important.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Alexander, although you did sort of sketch the whole roadmap for us, but just in case you want to add anything in the last 30 seconds, please.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you for the invitation again. It was a very interesting dialogue. It was very interactive and very good contributions and excellent moderated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alexander. Zainab, just coming to you before I go to Shakib Saab finally. Please.
Yeah, I think more focus should be given to climate risk insurance indexes, and those indices should be introduced for investors. Secondly, NDCs need to have a community-driven approach rather than ambitious approach. So yes, that's it from my end.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Zainab. And thank you so much, everyone. It was a wonderful discussion. With this, let me come to Shakib Saab for concluding the session. And one thing I can make sure is that we'll just sort of take 6 to 7 days, or perhaps a maximum of 10, and then get back to you with that 3-pager of a sort of a climate advisory that will sort of circulate. So with this, let me come to Shakib Ilahi Saab, who's currently a senior advisor at the Sustainable Development Policy Institute, for his final conclusion and the vote of thanks on behalf of SDPI. So Shakib Saab, with this, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. It was a very interesting discussion. I hope I'm audible. It was a very interesting.
We can hear you.
I just have like a minute and a half, so I'll be very quick. But I take Zainab's cue first. That it's the that need to get involved into the decision making, into the policy framework, into the driver and the ideas of wherever Pakistan wants to be, and wherever we want to go ahead with it. And of course, the gravity now has shifted onto China, with the US exiting the entire setup. And there's a, I mean, there's a lot of, I would say, I mean, China always comes up and takes on larger than life responsibility and is always successful. So there's not just a dependability that we have in China. I think the entire global South, as well as some of the developed countries, are depending on China, especially for renewables and the innovation that China offers. Having said that, I would like to thank everybody, Dr. Shafkat, Faisal Saab, Dr. Alexandra, and of course, our friend from China, Ms. Mayu, Ms. Angela Vishwanathan. Thank you very much. It was a great discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. And yeah, we just ended right on time. So yeah, thank you so much. Everyone will keep in touch. Yeah, bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.